Up until now, throughout Volume 9, we've been well aware that Ruby has been struggling with her own negative thoughts and feelings, and we've been waiting for her to eventually snap, to let it out, and for these struggles to take hold. And Episode 7 was when that snap happened. When her friend's actions finally became too much, and she let out all of the frustrations she had, targeting all of them, including Jaune. And Jaune had a lot of pent-up frustrations as well, especially with what was just happening in that episode, and so he lashed out at Ruby in turn. Both of them are very valid in their feelings. Both of them did go too far with some of their words in Ruby's case, and Jaune was a bit unfair with his accusations of Ruby, but their feelings are extremely valid. And this morning, I decided to go back and rewatch all of Volume 9 that we've gotten thus far, and wow, some of those things that Ruby said are extremely valid. With this new context that we get in Episode 7, rewatching the first 7 episodes of Volume 9 really does give some extra context. And in my opinion, the most valid and vindicating thing that Ruby said was when she told Blake to shut up. Because let's contrast just 2 things that Blake has said throughout this volume. One in a previous episode and one in Episode 7. Back in Episode 4 of Volume 9, when everyone had just told the cat about their story of Remnant and the fight that they need to get back to. Their current goal was to get Weiss, Blake, and Yang back to normal size. And the cat responds, well, you have much bigger issues to worry about than getting yourself back to normal. What was that witch's name again? Salem? How exactly are you going to defeat her without Atlas? And this is when Ruby, winces, and you can see that that pain is starting to take hold again. Yang says Ruby, like she's about to ask if Ruby's okay and try to console her sister, but it is Blake that says, hey, maybe we shouldn't think about our world right now. We've got more pressing issues at hand. She's pushing Ruby's feelings aside because there are more important issues that they need to deal with right now. Sensible. There are things that they need to deal with. Maybe once they're all back to normal size, they could then focus on Ruby's feelings, but, Ruby's feelings also very much matter because to be able to adequately assess situations, you need to be in the right frame of mind. Now let's contrast what Blake said there with what she said in this episode. We can be frustrated later. Right now, Jaune needs our help. Completely opposite of what she told Ruby. Instead, she's focusing on Jaune's feelings and how he is not okay right now, saying that the other issues can wait. But in Ruby's case, push the feelings aside, the issues need to take priority. And we can see how Ruby reacted to that in this episode. She was not happy. And this is when the anger really started to take hold of Ruby, which makes sense. I'm sure Blake was not aware at that moment of what exactly she was saying and the impact that it had on Ruby, but after watching Volume 9 up until now, wow, that is pretty much a giant slap in the face. So Ruby was incredibly justified in telling Blake to shut up. Because what Blake was about to say, guys, I know things are bad, but what? But there's always hope. But as long as we can talk things through, things will get better. That's not helpful in that moment. That's not what Ruby needed to hear. She needed to be able to get that frustration off of her chest and needed to know that people were there for her. And whatever Blake was about to say in that moment would have been devaluing Ruby's feelings yet again. Absolutely not what she wanted to hear. And a lot of the things that she was said and all of her feelings were completely valid. If we go back and look through the different interactions that took place throughout Volume 9, well, things become a lot clearer. In Episode 1, when they first arrived in the Ever After, everyone was kind of struggling with getting their bearings. They eventually reunited, came together, and Weiss then told them everything that happened after Ruby, Blake, and Yang fell. Told the truth about Penny, how she ended up sacrificing herself, and that hit Ruby really hard. And that was the beginning of her struggles in this volume, how those consuming negative emotions started to take hold in her, where that fear started to creep into her mind, where she became afraid to fight, that we saw in Episode 7. Because in Episode 1, when they first encountered the Jabberwocker, just as Blake and Weiss went to go fight it, Ruby reached for her weapon, ready for battle. That's changed now in episode 7. She is afraid to fight. Just seeing her weapon practically causes her to have a panic attack. Like, she is absolutely not okay, and it really started after Ruby learned the truth about Penny. Now, she has been having her struggles and has had a lot weighing on her for the past long while. The mother's promise that she gave up in episode 5, that's something that she's carried with her pretty much her entire life. Everything that happened in Volume 7 and 8, being confronted by Salem, learning the truth that her mother went to face her, and also seeing the Silver-Eyed Warriors and the implications that that had for her mother, that's been weighing on Ruby. And at that time, Yang was trying to support Ruby. When Ruby was wallowing in despair, Yang went over to try to cheer her up, to talk to her, and to let her know that Yang is there for her. But things have been different in the Ever After because everyone seems to be focusing on, well, getting out and getting back to Remnant more than dealing with their own internal issues. Because as we saw when they encountered the Herbalist, well, Weiss, Blake, and Yang are a lot more mentally stable than Ruby is right now. But back to Ruby learning about Penny's demise. When we get to episode 2, Weiss actually does try to reach out to Ruby. I know that was a lot to hear. And Ruby, at this moment, is not ready to talk. She turns and walks away from Weiss. She's not willing to talk about it. But after Jinxie's auction, where Ruby found Penny's blade, she walks over as Weiss, Blake, and Yang are conversing and sits down and starts talking. She says, "I was just drawn to it." And then the sky clouds over and it begins to rain. And Weiss, Blake, and Yang then start focusing on the rain. Not why it's raining. Not Ruby's sadness. They ignored her in this moment. And you can see while Weiss, Blake, and Yang are having this conversation about, okay, we just need to get out of here, let's just go to the tree, let's try to find a way out. Ruby is like wallowing in despair at this moment. And we can see the moment as she looks at Penny's blade, sees the reflection of her eyes, she decides at this moment that her friends' goals are more important. That in their minds, their focus is on getting out of the Ever After, not in helping her. So she pushes her feelings aside, and the rain stops. And it does not rain again from that point onwards. We saw that the world responded to Ruby's emotions. When she gave in to her sadness in the very first episode, the world started raining. When she was holding Penny's blade and was feeling extremely sad, the world started raining. It didn't rain again. And that is because Ruby had been suppressing her emotions, had been keeping everything bottled up inside because she was forcing herself into that position of leader to try to help her friends get out of the Ever After. And that just caused that frustration and that pressure to build. She then immediately gave up Penny's blade to the Crimson Guard because, well, it's not as important as getting out, obviously. She said, let's stop pretending like we know what we're doing. And they all went to the Crimson Palace. And then Blake, Weiss, and Yang ended up being shrunk down. Well, now they need Ruby more than ever. And everything in the Crimson Palace just went so wrong. But they met the Curious Cat. And then they were going to get help. And again, once the Curious Cat mentioned Salem and the loss of Atlas, Blake said, we need to focus on our issues right now and not think about our world. In other words, not think about our feelings towards that world and everything that happened. So Ruby, again, focused on that. Then they got to the Herbalist. And things also started to change when they got to the Herbalist. Because Ruby's younger self confronted her and said that your sister needs you, your friends need you, the world needs you to keep fighting an immortal monster forever. So what are you? Are you a huntress? Well, life isn't like a fairy tale. Mom faced her, and she failed. It's not really fair, is it? And it was here where her younger self was pushing her to be that leader, to have that plan, to always be the one that others can rely on, so she'll always be there to pick people up. And the blacksmith even commented on this, that Ruby is carrying such a heavy burden alone. And Ruby's only response was that her friends went elsewhere. Not only physically, but her friends don't recognize her mentality, and there's a mental distance between them. Exactly what is mirrored in the Volume 9 opening, where Weiss, Blake, and Yang are running after Alex, but Ruby is lagging behind, a distance forming between them. Now, through the interactions in Volume 9 thus far, and even in previous volumes, no one was expecting Ruby to have all the answers. Especially in Volume 9, it seemed like most of the decisions that were made were from a discussion between mostly Weiss, Blake, and Yang. Ruby was kind of just saying, okay, let's just do this, let's just do that, but everyone was discussing what to do, not, pushing Ruby to be in that leadership role. But Ruby herself was. She was also putting that pressure on herself, and that's something that the rest of her team didn't recognize. Once they got to the garden, got away from the herbalist, then they encountered Jaune, and the entire situation with the Ponderstorm happened. Blake and Yang were isolated on their own because they had more pressing issues to work out. More importantly than finding their way out, their feelings for each other were more important. But Ruby's feelings weren't important. And then we get to episode 7, when we see the situation that Jaune is in, and he's been in for years. It is very obvious and easy to see for everyone, all of Team RWBY, especially Weiss, Blake, and Yang, that Jaune is not okay. Because blatantly on the surface, he is not okay. And so they are focusing on trying to help him. Now, in the conversation that they have inside one of the paper houses, it is apparent that they need to help Jaune. Weiss even says this, because we need him. He can be our guide through the ever after. Without him, we're going to end up eaten by a Jabberwocker or being killed by the tree or something. And Weiss is saying that they need Jaune to lead them. Which, to Ruby, who has been putting this pressure on herself to lead, well, that again feels like the rest of her team is throwing her aside. Even though they weren't relying on Ruby, and it does make sense to have Jaune lead them because he's been in the Ever After for decades at this point, and he would know more. He would be a very helpful guide. It's not that they're saying they didn't need Ruby, but by this point, Ruby's anger and frustration is already taking hold and she's not able to see things clearly. But obviously, Weiss, Blake, and Yang are only able to see the surface level. Just as when the world started raining as Ruby was holding Penny's blade. All that Weiss, Blake, and Yang could see was that it was raining, not why it was raining. And so, when you contrast Jaune and Ruby, well, they've been traveling with Ruby this entire time. And so they didn't notice the subtle changes in Ruby's attitude. They noticed certain moments, but the priority was different at those moments. There was always something that seemed to interrupt it. And when they tried to reach out, because Weiss did in episode 2, and Ruby wasn't ready to talk. Yang did, and Blake pointed out that, well, there's more pressing issues at hand. And then the cat disappeared, so they got dragged along on that. So there were moments where her team tried to reach out to her, but it wasn't the right time, things were interrupted. And then encountering Jaune, it's like whiplash. Jaune that they used to know just a couple days ago, back in the end of Volume 8, the Jaune that fell in the crossroads, is extremely different in contrast to the Jaune now. And so they can much more easily see that Jaune is not okay. That he's been struggling with this for years and years. And so that becomes their priority. So when the Jabberwockers arrive and are defeated, and Jaune goes to hand Ruby's weapon back to her, and she recoils in fear, they then realize that, Ruby, are you okay? But, again, before they can actually have that conversation, they are cut short by the entire town of the Paper Pleasers being wiped out. And they know what that means for Jaune because they have seen how obsessively he's been trying to protect them. And so all of them rush over to Jaune and leave Ruby behind. Jaune's feelings are taking priority, but Ruby's are always cast aside. Whether that's because the situation demands that there might be more important things to do, more important things that take priority, which is up for debates at what is more important at that moment. Each individual is going to have a different thing to say, but it's always something that is more important than what Ruby's going through. And so she finally snaps. Why do I always have to be the leader? Why am I always the one to pick people up? What about me? Oh, no time, right? We gotta get home. We gotta help Jaune. We gotta find someone who won't screw everything up. Getting home is more important than Ruby's feelings. Helping Jaune is more important than helping her. And Jaune would make a better leader than her because he knows the ever after. No one was actually trying to replace her, but to Ruby it certainly felt that way, and my god, she is absolutely validated in those feelings. Like, wow. And then she turns on Blake and Yang. Gotta stay positive, right? All smiles all the time. Maybe we'll even sort out our own feelings. You know, super happy for you, by the way. That is just anger and frustration lashing out at Blake and Yang. I'm sure if she was in a calmer mind, she would actually be happy for them, but their feelings for each other were again prioritized over everything else. Rather than getting home, which everyone was trying to work towards, that was what was more important to them. Now, really, logically, that does make sense. Both of them thought each other was dead, and they may never see each other again, so yeah, I can understand why that would be their priority, but again, Ruby's mindset at that time, she was struggling and absolutely not okay. But it seemed like no one cared. But they did care about Jaune. And so Jaune became the target of her anger, and then she said the thing that is gonna be hard to forgive, I think. Jaune, I know, is a very forgiving person, and when everything is said and done, I'm sure that he will forgive her, but when Ruby said, "Oh, I'm sorry, is this a bad time? Are we supposed to be mourning Jaune's make-believe friends?" That was pure anger, pure just frustration, and trying to find someone to blame. Ruby's feelings are extremely understandable given everything that she's been through, as are Jaune's. Because Jaune lashed out at Ruby after this. Because she said, well, one of the worst things she could probably say at this moment. Jaune had been desperately trying to protect the paper pleasers, and now he was reliving that trauma of not being able to protect Penny. Because now that entire village that he was trying to protect was wiped out before him. And so he was trying to find someone to blame as well, so he wouldn't have to blame himself. And he lashed out at Ruby, saying, "It's your fault. The Jabberwockers were after you, because Neo hates you." Regardless of the fact that Jaune knew this beforehand and still brought Team RWBY to his village. And let's not forget that it was your plan that failed, that landed us in the Ever After. Regardless of the fact that Jaune agreed to this plan. No one else came up with a better one. And there was no way to predict that Cinder would use the Relic of Knowledge to find out that plan. Meaning that regardless of what plan they came up with, the Relic of Knowledge would always tell Cinder what that plan was, and Cinder would be able to find a way to mess with it. The plan was a good plan, but both Jaune and Ruby are facing their own struggles, and it is tearing them apart. Ruby at a much more rapid rate than Jaune, as Jaune has been trying to live with and cope with his trauma for a very long time. He knows that he's not okay, and he knows that this is something that he's going to have to live with, but he doesn't know how to move forward. He's still stuck in the past. When he's yelling at Ruby, a lot of people are pointing out that Jaune's like, 40, 50, and he's yelling at a child. He's yelling at a 17-year-old. But Jaune's mentality is pretty much still the same as it was. He has matured and is more knowledgeable about the Ever After, able to make decisions based on that information, but his mind is still stuck at that moment where he could not save Penny. I don't think his mind has really been able to mature that much past that. Ruby, however, the struggles and pressure that has been building up from the experiences she's had, and also the pressure that she's putting on herself, thank you Herb for adding to that, it has really worn away her patience, especially with everyone prioritizing everything and everyone else other than her. She's been trying to hold it all in, and likely that's why no one noticed, because it was just very subtle things. Well, maybe she's not struggling as much. And at the moments when Ruby did try to talk, something else came up. A higher priority. Something that was more important than her feelings. And so this conflict happened. Ruby lashed out at everyone, and Jaune lashed out at her. And we can see the look on Ruby's face. This was something that was pointed out to me when I was streaming after the episode aired. That Ruby was probably really hurt by Jaune saying that to her, because Jaune has always been the one who has been there for her. Back in Volume 1, it was Ruby who told Jaune about the importance of being a leader. And Jaune, out of everyone there, was the one who traveled with Ruby to Haven Academy during Volumes 4 and 5. Jaune has been there for her, has been an anchor, a rock, a pillar of support. And him turning on her like that probably hurt more than anything else up until that point. And even though Jaune likely didn't mean what he said to Ruby, those words still hit the mark, because those were things that Ruby was probably already thinking about herself. And now she's taken off on her own. She's going to be alone with these thoughts. Probably going to encounter Neo, have other conflicts. She at least has Little with her, and hopefully Little will be able to give Ruby some hope, some positivity, and something to hold on to be able to keep pushing forward. Ruby, at this point, probably feels like she isn't needed by any of them, that none of them really care, and she's reached her lowest point. And I'm curious to see how it's going to go in the rest of the volume. With the way that things have ended at the end of episode 7, and only 3 episodes left in volume 9, it really does feel like there's too much left to resolve to be able to get out of the Ever After in only 3 episodes. I think at the end of Volume 9, we might still be in the Ever After until the beginnings of Volume 10, which I won't mind if it allows Team Ruby and Jaune to be able to work through their problems and give them the proper time to resolve those issues, to come to terms with them, and hopefully start to heal. As for what that process is going to be in the Ever After, ascension seems more and more likely for some of our characters, but that's a topic for another video. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on the struggle that Ruby has been going through. The culmination of all of this anger and frustration causing her to lash out at Jaune, and Jaune's frustrations to lash out at Ruby. Ruby is suffering right now. She is afraid to fight, afraid to face Salem, afraid to lose anything else, and wants people to be there for her. But there's always something more important. She feels neglected and afraid. And at this point, we can only hope that Ruby will be able to bounce back from this, somehow, some way. But that remains to be seen. If you guys enjoyed this video, want to see more like it, more RWBY analyses, RWBY reviews, theories, etc., make sure to subscribe and join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. If you like the series No Game No Life, then make sure to subscribe to my second channel as well, The Daily Flugel. And if you want to see some games played live, make sure to check out my Twitch channel as well, linked in the description below. I stream every Tuesday and Saturday. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.